You know, some mornings feel exactly the same. Same hallway, same faces that never look your way. I was pushing my cart past the boardroom, half asleep, when I smelled something off. Sweet, chemical wrong. The CEO's hand was already on her coffee cup, and before I could think, I just yelled, "Don't drink that." Everything stopped. Her eyes met mine like she was seeing me for the first time. And right then, I realized I might have just saved her life or ruined my own. I was supposed to keep my head down, push the cart, empty the bins, and move on. That's what people expect from a janitor on the executive floor: quiet wheels, quiet steps, no eye contact. But when I saw the CEO reach for that cup, something in me cut through the noise. "Don't drink that coffee." My voice came out louder than I meant. It bounced off the glass walls of the boardroom on the 23rd floor of Pierce Tower. Every suit in there turned like I'd set off a fire alarm. Charlotte Pierce froze with her fingers just touching the porcelain handle. Red dress, steady posture, eyes that didn't blink much. I'd cleaned her office for 2 years and never said more than "good morning." Now I was the problem everyone wanted removed. A few people snickered. One guy near the end of the table muttered for security. Another called me the help, like I wasn't standing 10 feet away. I didn't move. That's old training. You square your feet and ride it out. I wasn't trying to make a scene. I was trying to keep a woman alive. I said, "Don't drink it." I repeated, calmer this time. "There's something in it." Charlotte held up a hand, and the room shut up like someone hit mute. "You've got 30 seconds, she said, voice even. "Use them well." "Name's Jake Mercer," I said. "Army Corps of Engineers, 8 years. I've handled coolant leaks and hazmat kits. Ethylene glycol has a sweet smell most folks miss. I caught a trace when I rolled past the executive kitchen. It's faint, like it's buried under vanilla creamer. I think someone laced your coffee." That got the oxygen moving in the room. Victor Hale, the COO, rose halfway from his chair, all concern and polished manners. Silver tie, jaw set like a TV lawyer. "Ms. Pierce, this is ridiculous," he said. "We're minutes from a major acquisition. We can't derail the meeting because a janitor thinks he's an expert in smells." I kept my eyes on Charlotte, not him. I'd seen Victor in the evenings often enough to know his brand. Late hours, private calls, the kind of guy who always stands 2 inches closer than you want. Charlotte studied me like she was reading a dashboard. I couldn't tell if she saw a man risking his job or a fool who'd watched too many crime shows. "Test it," she said at last. You could feel the air shift. A couple of board members rolled their eyes. One of them, Robert Whitman, the CFO, tugged at his tie and asked for security. Charlotte didn't look away from the cup. "Call the police," she told her assistant. "Ask for a field testing kit." We paused for an hour. That's when my knees tried to give out. I locked them. Losing a job is one thing. Watching someone drink poison because you were afraid of losing a job is something you don't forgive yourself for. I learned that the hard way. While we waited, no one looked at me like a person. They stared like I'd tracked mud onto a white carpet. Victor paced by the window and stared out over the Hudson like the river owed him an answer. Charlotte sat still, hands folded, but I noticed a small tremor in her fingers before she hit it. Funny the things you catch when you spend your life being ignored. The detectives arrived fast, faster than I expected for Manhattan at rush hour. Detective Laura Nguyen led the team. No nonsense. They swabbed the rim, dipped a strip, and watched the color bloom. Blue, then purple. "Ethylene glycol," the detective said. "Concentrations high." Nobody laughed after that. The assistant who'd carried the cup sat down hard like her chair had been pulled from under her. Whitman went a shade I'd only ever seen on bad seafood. Victor put on a concerned face, but his eyes were busy, like a man doing math no one else can see. "Who had access to the coffee?" Detective Nguyen asked. The assistant explained the executive kitchen routine, the delivery mix-up, the unattended machine. In other words, plenty of opportunity. Victor stepped toward Charlotte as if to steady her, and she moved away a step so small you'd miss it if you weren't watching. I was watching. She turned to me. "How did you know?" she asked. Not a challenge, just clean curiosity. Most people wouldn't catch a smell like that. "Experience," I said. "And luck." I was mopping the hall. The scent drifted past. Brought me back to a depot in Kandahar I'd rather forget. I figured I could be wrong and deal with the fallout. Or I could be right and save you a trip to the morgue. Her mouth tightened, maybe at the word, maybe at the choice. "You risked your job on a hunch." "On a memory," I said. and on the fact that I've got a daughter at home who needs her dad to sleep at night. That was as much as I wanted to say about Mia right then. This wasn't the time to unpack why a guy with an engineering degree pushes a broom, or how you end up cleaning floors in a building where people won't learn your name. That story can wait. What mattered in that room was simple: a cup, a smell, and a call I had to make. Detective Nguyen bagged the evidence and started taking statements. The boardroom buzzed, not with jokes now, but with fear disguised as strategy. Phones lit up. Lawyers called back. Prices and reputations raced each other down imaginary stairwells. I stood by the door with my card and kept my hand still on the handle. Charlotte finally stood. She wasn't rattled. You could tell she'd taken hits before and learned to breathe through impact. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this meeting is adjourned until further notice. Our priority is security and cooperation with the police." People shuffled out in clumps. A few shot me quick looks, some grateful, most confused, a couple angry, like I'd spoiled a good morning. Victor lingered, then drifted toward the exit with two directors stuck to his sides. I didn't chase him. I just told myself one thing as I rolled my cart back into the hall. This wasn't an accident. Not the cup. Not the timing. Not the man who stood up to tell the room the janitor was out of line. I've missed a lot in my life, but I don't miss patterns. And what I smelled in that coffee wasn't just poison. It was a plan. You don't plan to disappear. It just happens slowly. One day you're fixing turbines in the desert, wearing the same uniform as 1,000 other soldiers. The next, you're standing in a queen's apartment with an empty wallet, a sleeping child, and a job application for janitorial work in your hand. That's how invisibility starts, not by choice, but by necessity. After I left the army, I thought my engineering degree would carry me somewhere better. I pictured myself working on construction projects, maybe renewable energy, something steady that made sense. But then Emma died. That single night tore everything down to the studs. She'd been working for a pharmaceutical company in Jersey, smart and dedicated, the kind of woman who couldn't ignore something wrong even if it meant trouble. The call came just minutes before her accident, her voice shaking as she told me she'd found something in the data she wasn't supposed to see. Then headlights, sirens, paperwork, condolences, and a closed case file stamped break failure. The system moved on. I didn't. I tried to fight it. I called lawyers, reporters, anyone who'd listen. They all said the same thing. Without proof, it was just grief talking. When the company offered a settlement and a non-disclosure agreement, I signed it for one reason: our daughter, Mia. The money went into a trust for her education. I told myself that was what Emma would have wanted. That's how I ended up mopping marble floors for people who earn in a week what I used to make in a year. Every morning at 4:30, I'd leave our building while Mia was still asleep, her tiny hand clutching the corner of her blanket. Mrs. Ramirez, our neighbor, would stop by after I left, make her breakfast, get her to school. I'd catch the 5:12 to Manhattan, change into coveralls in the locker room, and push my cart through the silent halls of Pierce Tower before dawn. Most of the executives never looked at me. That's the secret power of people like me. We see everything because no one sees us. I knew who was having an affair, who was leaking numbers to competitors, who pretended to work late but spent hours watching stock charts. Observation became my habit again, like back in the service. Only now the battlefield was polished glass and quiet whispers. When I got home at night, Mia would already have dinner waiting. Usually mac and cheese or scrambled eggs, her version of gourmet. We'd sit together on the couch, her telling me about school, about how she'd aced her spelling quiz or beat her best friend at tag. She always asked if I'd had a good day, and I always said yes. I never told her that being invisible wears you down, that every polite sir from a security guard feels like a reminder that you don't belong anywhere. One night she asked me, "Daddy, when are you going back to being an engineer?" I remember her small face looking up at me, hopeful. I told her, soon. Even though I knew the truth, that my license had expired, my references were old, and no one hires a man who's been pushing a mop for years. But I needed her to believe that life could turn around, that her dad still had some fight left in him. What she didn't know was that every time I walked those corporate floors, I was haunted by Emma's voice, by the idea that her death hadn't been random. Sometimes I'd spot a memo or overhear a conversation about mergers and acquisitions, and something in the back of my mind would itch, like an old wound reopening. I'd think about the truck that hit her, about the companies that got rich afterward, about the people who called it just business. Then came that morning in the boardroom. I'd almost skipped that floor, figured they wouldn't even notice if the trash stayed another day. But instinct told me to go. And when I smelled that faint sweetness coming from Charlotte Pierce's coffee, something deep inside me, older than logic, told me to act. It wasn't just about saving a stranger. It was about finally speaking up when I'd stayed silent before. About not failing another person the way I failed Emma. They can call me a janitor, a nobody, whatever they want. But that morning, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like a man again. Not invisible, not broken, not forgotten. The detectives packed up their samples and left behind a silence thick enough to choke on. You'd think people who spent their lives in high-stakes meetings would know how to handle pressure, but the truth is, when real danger shows up, money and titles don't mean much. Fear looks the same on everyone. Charlotte stood by the window, her reflection sharp against the skyline. The morning light hit the side of her face and caught something new in her expression. Not panic, not disbelief, but calculation. She was already trying to fit the pieces together. I could almost see her mind sorting through names, routines, motives. Victor Hale stayed close, pretending to help manage the chaos. His voice had that smooth, calm people practice in front of mirrors. Charlotte, let me handle this. You don't need to get distracted by hysteria. The board expects a recovery plan by noon. She didn't answer, just turned, eyes still on me. Mr. Mercer, would you step into my office? That caught me off guard. Most executives would have let security toss me out by now. I followed her down the hall, my boots squeaking on marble, the whole floor still buzzing like a shaken hive. Her office looked like the kind of place meant to intimidate. Glass desk, framed stock certificates, a skyline view that could make a man feel like an ant. But she wasn't hiding behind the desk. She stood by a small coffee table, staring at the untouched cup the detectives had bagged. Tell me something, she said finally. How long have you been working here? Almost 2 years, I said. And you've never said a word to me until today. Didn't seem like you needed another voice in your day, I said, maybe a little too honestly. But when I saw that cup, well, it smelled wrong. Wrong how? It's hard to explain. When you've handled chemicals long enough, your nose remembers things your brain doesn't. That smell took me back to a field depot where a coolant line burst. We used to test the stuff on cloth. It's got this sickly sweetness, like something pretending to be safe. She listened carefully, like someone used to making decisions that cost millions but didn't trust anyone's instincts but her own. You realize how absurd this sounds? Yeah, I said. And I'd think the same if I were you. But you've got to admit, absurd or not, it saved your life. Her eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. You risked your job for that. Ma'am, jobs come and go. But I've already lost one person because I didn't act fast enough. I wasn't going to let that happen again. The words slipped out before I could stop them. She didn't push, didn't ask who I meant. Instead, she nodded once, slow and deliberate. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Victor walked in without knocking. He had a tablet in one hand, anger hiding under a polite smile. Charlotte, the board's waiting. We can't suspend business every time some janitor decides to play detective. She looked at him with a calm that made him blink. We're not suspending business. We're suspending trust until I know who tried to kill me. That's when I saw it. The flicker of something behind his eyes. Not surprise. Irritation. Like a man whose plan just hit a small but serious snag. Detective Nguyen will coordinate with our security department, she added. You'll give her full access to personnel schedules, entry logs, and surveillance footage from the executive kitchen. Of course, Victor said smoothly, but his jaw tightened. I didn't move, but I caught the way his eyes brushed over me on the way out. Cold, assessing, the kind of look that doesn't forget a face. When the door closed, Charlotte exhaled and sat for the first time. You think he's involved? She asked. I think you already suspect he is, I said. A faint smile touched her lips, tired but sharp. You really don't know when to shut up, do you, Mr. Mercer? No, ma'am. Not when someone's trying to bury me for being right. She leaned back, staring at the skyline. Then maybe I need someone who doesn't know how to shut up. That was the first time I saw her not as a name on a brass plate, but as a person, a woman who'd fought her way into a world that never forgives mistakes, who wore confidence like armor because it was the only thing keeping her alive. When I left her office that day, the hallways of Pierce Tower looked the same, but I felt the shift. Whatever was happening here wasn't just an attempted poisoning. It was rot, deep, planned, and patient. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I knew I wasn't done with it. Not yet. After the poison scare, life inside Pierce Tower didn't go back to normal. You could feel it in the air, a hum of tension under the polished calm. Every hallway conversation stopped when I walked past. Maybe they saw me as the hero janitor, or maybe they just wondered how I'd still kept my job. Either way, I wasn't invisible anymore. And to be honest, that scared me more than being ignored ever did. But what really kept me awake wasn't the attention. It was something else. A few words Victor Hale said when he thought no one was listening. It was late one night, 2 days after the incident. Most of the lights on the executive floor were dimmed. I was emptying bins, just another quiet night, when I heard Victor's voice coming from behind the half-closed door of his office. "The accident worked before," he said. His tone was low, impatient. "But this time, it needs to be cleaner. Untraceable. No loose ends." I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears. There was another voice, softer, one of his assistants maybe. "And the janitor?" she asked. "No one could have predicted that," Victor snapped. "Just stick to the plan." Those words hit me like a hammer. The accident worked before. I stood in that hallway for a full minute after he hung up, trying to breathe. My hands were shaking so bad, I nearly dropped the trash bag. The accident. The way he said it wasn't casual. It was practiced. Controlled. Like a man who had done this before. That night, I didn't go straight home. I stopped by a small diner that stayed open late on 45th. The kind of place where no one cared if you sat for hours with one cup of coffee. I pulled out the old box from my locker, the one I hadn't opened in years. Emma's notes, photos, the letter from the lawyers, everything I had refused to throw away. I started reading her last research logs again. She'd been studying trial data for a new drug. The company she worked for had hidden some results, adverse reactions, organ damage. She'd found the proof and was planning to go public. But what I never noticed before was the note at the bottom of one page. Pressure from acquisition interest. Name redacted. Outside firm pushing for undervalued buyout. I flipped through the documents, and my stomach turned cold. The company that acquired hers months after the crash was connected to Sterling Capital, one of the firms Victor Hale had worked for before joining Pierce Enterprises. It couldn't be coincidence. Not with what I'd just heard. I spread everything out across the table. Emma's notes, my settlement letter, old news articles about the merger. The timeline lined up too cleanly. She'd discovered the fraud in June. The crash happened in July. The acquisition finalized in August. The same playbook Victor was running now. Create chaos, remove the obstacle, and swoop in for the rescue. For the first time in years, I let myself admit what I'd always known. Emma's death wasn't an accident. I sat there until the waitress refilled my coffee twice without asking. The guilt hit me in waves. 5 years I'd lived like a ghost, telling myself I'd done all I could. But I hadn't. I'd let them bury her truth because I was tired, broke, and scared. Now I knew who had done it. And this time, I wasn't powerless. By the time I got home, dawn was breaking over Queens. Mia was still asleep, her small body curled beneath her blanket. I stood in the doorway watching her breathe, and I made a promise, no more silence. I'd find a way to make them pay for what they did to her mother. But I couldn't do it alone. There was only one person with enough power and reason to help me. Charlotte Pierce. When I walked into Charlotte Pierce's office the next morning, I wasn't sure if she'd throw me out or call security. She was already there, standing by the window, her reflection cut clean against the skyline like she was carved out of the city itself. No red dress today, just a sharp black suit that looked like it could deflect bullets. "Mr. Mercer," she said without turning around. "I was going to call you. I owe you my life." I swallowed hard. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am. But you might want to hear what I found." That made her turn. Her blue eyes studied me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. I could tell she wasn't used to being approached by people like me. The gulf between our worlds was wide and shiny, like the glass between us and the city below. I laid the folder on her desk. Emma's research notes, the settlement letter, and the company report I'd printed from an archive site. "Before you read that," I said quietly, "you need to know something. My wife died 5 years ago. Car crash, officially. But she called me before it happened. She was scared. She'd found proof her company faked trial data on a drug they were about to release. Said someone was pushing her to stay quiet. Charlotte didn't move. Just listened. The company went under a month later. Bought out cheap by Sterling Capital." Her eyes flicked up at that name. Sterling Capital, she repeated slowly. Victor Hale's old firm. Exactly. I walked her through everything. Emma's notes, the acquisition timeline, and Victor's late-night call I overheard. She asked sharp, deliberate questions, the kind only someone trained to find leverage would ask. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavy. So you're saying Victor orchestrated the death of your wife to collapse her company's value? She said finally, her voice calm but low. And now he's trying to do the same to me. I can't prove it yet, I said. But everything lines up. He poisons people, manipulates the fallout, then profits from the wreckage. Charlotte paced to the window. For a moment, she didn't speak. When she turned back, there was something fierce in her eyes, the kind of resolve I'd seen in soldiers before a mission. If what you're saying is true, then I've been working beside a murderer. You've been trusting one, I said quietly. She nodded once, sharp and certain. Then we stop him. But we do it smart. That was the first time she said we. She didn't hesitate. Within hours, she arranged discreet access to the company's financial records. Her tone on the phone was smooth and controlled, the voice of someone who knew how to command without drawing suspicion. She even ordered the security team to assist Mr. Mercer in reviewing building maintenance footage for the police, giving me legitimate access without anyone blinking an eye. For 2 weeks, we worked after hours. I'd come in during my night shift, and she'd stay late under the excuse of catching up on quarterly reports. Her office lights became the only ones burning on the 23rd floor. Those nights changed everything. We built a pattern. She handled internal emails and board communications while I combed through system logs, tracing backdoor access to data servers and expense reports. My engineering background came back fast. Numbers made sense to me in ways people never did. I found irregular transfers routed through shell vendors and traced them to Victor's shadow accounts. Every discovery hit like a drumbeat, steady, damning, undeniable. In between the tension and fatigue, there were quiet moments too. We'd eat takeout at midnight, cartons of noodles and cheap coffee replacing corporate catering. She confessed she hadn't eaten from a paper box in a decade. My father thought Chinese takeout was for people who gave up on ambition, she said once with a wry smile. Maybe he just didn't know the joy of sesame chicken, I said, and she laughed. A real, unguarded laugh that made her seem younger, human, maybe even lonely. Sometimes she'd ask about Mia. I'd tell her how my daughter insisted on reading bedtime stories over the phone when I worked late. Charlotte would smile, soft and far away, like she was remembering something she'd never had. I always thought I'd have kids, she said one night, her tone almost fragile. But the company came first. It always does. It doesn't have to, I said. That's not law. It's just habit. Our eyes met across her desk, and for a few seconds, the noise of the city below vanished. There was a pull there, something neither of us said out loud. But we both knew it. The connection was real. Still, there wasn't time for anything else. The walls were closing in, and Victor was moving faster than we expected. One night, Charlotte received a message from the board, emergency session tomorrow morning. Topic, leadership review. That was it. The storm was coming. And by dawn, one of us would be finished. The next morning, the boardroom didn't just look full, it looked loaded. 20 chairs occupied, and more people lined up along the walls with notebooks and clipped expressions. I pushed my card in like I always did, pretending to check the trash bins, my ID tags swinging as if I belonged there. Truth was, I'd never felt more out of place or more ready. Charlotte sat at the head of the table, calm in a dark navy suit, hands folded like a poker player holding all the aces. Victor Hale stood near the screen, the picture of confidence, his gray suit perfect, hair slicked back like nothing had touched him. He was smiling, that kind of smile that only comes from a man who thinks he's already won. He started with numbers. Always numbers. Graphs, projections, charts that told a story he'd written himself. As you can see, he said, pointing at the slide, Pierce Enterprises has taken severe losses under Ms. Pierce's leadership. Emotional decisions. Risky innovation. Neglecting our core investors. He paused for effect. And then there's the recent incident. Every head turned toward Charlotte. I kept sweeping, my eyes on the reflection in the glass wall behind him. Victor continued, his tone smooth, sympathetic. We're all concerned about her well-being. Traumatic experiences can cloud judgment. She's seeing conspiracies where there are none. She's trusting a janitor's word over the company's own executives. That last part hung in the air. Laughter rippled, small, nervous, cruel. I felt my grip tighten on the broom handle. Charlotte didn't flinch. She let him talk, let him feel the room sway his way. When he finally made his big move, the motion for temporary leadership transfer, she leaned forward and said, quiet and clear, "Do you have evidence of any wrongdoing on my part, Mr. Hale?" He smiled, tapping the folder in front of him. "I do. Financial irregularities. Misused funds. Payments to outside consultants with no documented purpose. Here." But she cut him off before he could stand. "You mean these documents?" she said, pulling an identical folder from her briefcase. "Forged versions of legitimate reports you altered to frame me." The room went dead silent. Victor's eyes flashed. "That's absurd. These are verified by internal accounting." "No," she said sharply. "They were verified by my private auditors, who found every transfer, every falsified signature, every redirect, all traced to a secondary account under your name." He opened his mouth to argue, but she was already moving. "Mr. Mercer?" I straightened up, heart pounding but voice steady. "Morning, everyone. For those who don't know, I'm Jake Mercer. I've been cleaning this building for 2 years. But before that, I spent 8 in the Army Corps of Engineers. I know how to read systems. I know how to find leaks." I plugged the flash drive Charlotte had given me into the projector. The screen came alive with transaction logs, email chains, even snippets of recorded calls from internal security, all pulled legally from company servers. Each line painted the same picture: sabotage, manipulation, and a trail of stolen funds that led straight to Victor Hale. He started shouting, first about data tampering, then about illegal recordings. I let him dig his hole. When he said, "This janitor's wife's death has nothing to do with me," the whole room turned to look at him. Charlotte's voice was soft but lethal. "Funny, we never mentioned your connection to Mr. Mercer's wife." The silence that followed could have cracked the windows. His face went pale, then red. He tried to recover. I heard rumors, but the damage was done." I took a step forward. "You killed my wife," I said, steady as steel. "You pressured her company, faked the data, and when she tried to expose it, you made sure her car never made it home. Then you used the fallout to buy her company cheap. And now you tried the same play on Charlotte." Some board members stood, others whispered into their phones. It didn't matter anymore. The truth was out, and the man who'd lived above consequence was finally cornered. The door opened, and Detective Nguyen walked in with 2 officers. "Victor Hale," she said, her voice echoing across the room. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, corporate fraud, and attempted homicide." Victor tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The cops cuffed him while he shouted about lawyers, friends, influence, the same noise men like him always make when the ground finally gives way. Charlotte didn't move until he was gone. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and said simply, "Meeting adjourned." No one argued. When the room emptied, she turned to me. "You did it, Jake." I shook my head. "We did. You gave me the one thing I didn't have, a voice loud enough to be heard." She smiled, tired but real. "You gave me something too. Truth." That was the first time she said it. Not as a CEO, not as a leader, but as a woman who'd just faced the edge and lived to tell it. When the police finally left and the building emptied out, the air inside Pierce Tower felt hollow, like the sound had been sucked right out of the walls. I stood in that boardroom long after everyone else was gone, the city glowing through the glass behind Charlotte. She leaned against the table, one hand on the polished wood, her shoulders no longer squared like armor. "I should thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my life. Twice." "You don't owe me anything," I told her. "You did the hard part. You stood up in front of them when it counted." She gave a small, tired smile. "You risked everything when you shouted across that room. Don't think I'll ever forget that." For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The city hummed below us. Taxis, sirens, a low mechanical rhythm that somehow sounded like relief. Then she turned, fully facing me. "I want to offer you something, Jake," she said. "A real position here. Head of security. Or engineering, if you prefer. Name your salary." It hit me harder than I expected. For years, I dreamed about getting back into engineering, of being seen for what I actually knew, not just the broom I pushed. And now, here it was, handed to me by the woman who ran half of Manhattan's skyline. But instead of excitement, I felt something else, a quiet resistance in my gut. I looked at her, and she seemed genuinely puzzled by my silence. You deserve it, she said. You've earned it. You don't belong in a uniform. No, I said slowly, shaking my head. I don't want charity, Charlotte. I don't want to be the janitor who got promoted because he saved the boss. She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. If you really want to help, there's something else you can do. Her expression softened, curious. Name it. Set up a scholarship, I said. In Emma's name. For kids who lost parents. Cover everything. Tuition, books, housing. Give them the kind of chance my daughter's going to have. Charlotte blinked, caught off guard. That's beautiful, Jake. Done. Consider it done. I hesitated, then added. And I want to go back to school myself. Get recertified as an engineer. I'll pay for it. Work for it. I just need a chance. She didn't hesitate. Then you'll have it. I'll make sure of it. Her voice cracked just slightly at the end. Not weakness, gratitude. The kind that comes from seeing decency when the world's shown you nothing but greed. We walked out of that boardroom together, her in heels, me in scuffed work boots. The contrast made her smile. You know, she said softly. You look more like an equal partner than an employee. I'll take being myself, I said. That's enough. Later that evening, I picked up Mia from Mrs. Ramirez's apartment. She ran into my arms, breathless with excitement, holding up her spelling test, another perfect score. Daddy, guess what? I got 100 again. I hugged her tight. That's my girl. On the walk home, I told her everything. Not the dark parts, not about poison or death or men in handcuffs, but about the truth finally coming out, about how Mommy's name would help other kids now. She listened with the kind of focus only a child who's been through too much can manage. When I finished, she said softly, Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy. Maybe, I said, but I think she'd be proud of us. Mia slipped her small hand into mine as we crossed the street. Does that mean we can stop worrying now? I looked up at the Manhattan skyline, that tower glowing like a monument to everything we'd just survived. Yes, sweetheart, I said. I think we can. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of headlights and brakes. 3 weeks passed before I saw her again. Long enough for the noise around Victor's arrest to die down, for the headlines to fade from front pages and settle into financial columns. Life finally found a rhythm again. I started night classes at the community college, engineering recertification. The rust began to come off my mind, one problem set at a time. Mia loved hearing about it. Every evening, she'd climb onto the couch with her homework and say, We're both students now, Daddy. It was the kind of peace I hadn't known since before Emma's death. Ordinary, earned, quiet. Then, one Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and there she was, Charlotte Pierce, standing in the dim hallway of our old building in Queens, somehow looking out of place and perfectly natural at the same time. No power suit this time. Just jeans, a soft gray sweater, and a paper bag of groceries in one hand, a board game tucked under the other. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, a little uncertainly. Mia sent me a card through the office. She invited me to dinner. Before I could answer, Mia appeared behind me, beaming. You came. I told you she'd come, Daddy. Charlotte smiled. Not her boardroom smile, not her polished one, but something warm and unguarded. I thought I'd take her up on the invitation. I stepped aside. Fair warning, I said. It's spaghetti night, and she insists on making the sauce herself. Charlotte grinned. I like spaghetti. Dinner that night was simple. Cheap noodles, a sauce heavy on oregano, laughter filling the cracks of our little apartment. Charlotte helped Mia stir the pot like she'd done it 100 times, listening as my daughter explained, with deadly seriousness, that the secret ingredient was love and extra sauce. For someone who lived in a glass tower above the city, Charlotte fit into our cramped kitchen like she'd been there all along. She didn't talk about the company once. No mergers, no forecasts. Just stories. About growing up with a father who'd taught her to treat emotion like a weakness. About learning to fight for her place in a world that judged her twice. Once for being young, and again for being a woman. I thought success would make me feel safe, she said quietly, helping Mia set the plates. But all it did was build higher walls. Then stop living behind them, I said before thinking. She met my eyes across the table, and for a second, everything else disappeared. The noise of the street, the clatter of the forks, even the hum of the old fridge. Just her and me. Two people who'd been broken by the same kind of loneliness. After dinner, we played the board game she'd brought. Mia beat us both by a mile. Charlotte laughed until she cried when Mia announced that the loser had to wash the dishes. Rules are rules, my daughter declared. And somehow, Charlotte didn't argue. By the time Mia fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on Charlotte's lap, the apartment had gone quiet again. I cleaned up in the kitchen, watching them from the corner of my eye. This woman who'd once been untouchable, now sitting barefoot on my old couch, gently brushing hair from my daughter's face. I haven't felt this peaceful in years, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You're welcome here anytime, I told her, meaning it. She looked up at me, and something unspoken passed between us. Gratitude, maybe, or the beginning of something deeper. Is that what we are, Jake? Friends. I sat beside her, careful not to wake Mia. I think we could be, I said. Then I hesitated. Or maybe something more, I don't know. I'm not good at labeling things. She smiled faintly. Neither am I. But I'd like to learn. We stayed there in silence for a long time. Just the three of us, with the city lights flickering through the blinds. For the first time since Emma died, the world didn't feel like a place I had to survive. It felt like a place I could live in again. When Charlotte finally stood to leave, Mia stirred and murmured, Miss Charlotte, are you coming back? Charlotte bent down, brushed a kiss across her forehead, and said, If your dad will let me. I walked her to the door. You don't have to ask, I said quietly. She gave me that same soft smile and replied, Then maybe I'll see you next week. The door closed behind her, but the warmth stayed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man living with ghosts. 6 months later, the gossip columns were still buzzing about it. Billionaire CEO dating former janitor. They called it everything from a modern fairy tale to a corporate scandal. But in our little apartment in Queens, none of that mattered. Headlines don't wash dishes, help with homework, or laugh at bad jokes. Life had become quieter, smaller, and more real. I'd finished my certification courses and was working full-time again, this time as head of sustainable engineering at Pierce Enterprises. Charlotte said it was an investment in integrity, but to me, it was something simpler. It was earning my way back to the man I used to be. I still took the same train every morning, still brought Mia to school before work, still stopped at the same coffee cart where the owner always winked and said, Engineer now, huh? Don't forget the little people. Mia thrived. She had more confidence, more light in her eyes. She and Charlotte had grown close, reading together on weekends, cooking side by side, filling the apartment with a kind of warmth I hadn't felt since Emma was alive. One quiet evening, rain tapping against the windows, I stood in the kitchen watching Charlotte and Mia set the table. Their movements were in sync, two people who'd learned each other's rhythm without even trying. Charlotte looked up at me, a strand of hair falling loose across her face, and I felt something deep and steady in my chest. I love you, I said before I even realized it was out loud. She froze, then smiled. Not her composed CEO smile, but something softer, genuine. I love you too, she said. Both of you. Mia turned, hands on her hips, all business. Does that mean you're going to be my mom? She asked, her voice cutting through the moment with the kind of direct honesty only kids have. Charlotte knelt to meet her eyes. I could never replace your mom, sweetheart, she said gently. She'll always be your mother. But if you'll let me, I'd love to be part of your family. Mia thought about it seriously, tapping her chin like a tiny executive in deep negotiation. Then she nodded. You make Daddy less sad about Mommy. I think she would like you. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt Charlotte's hand in mine. She would, I whispered. I know she would. That night, after Mia fell asleep, Charlotte and I stood on the small balcony, watching the city lights blink through the drizzle. The air smelled like wet pavement and renewal. I never expected this, she said softly. When I met you, I thought I had everything. Money, power, control. But I was empty inside, wasn't I? You weren't empty, I told her. Just guarded. You had love to give. You just needed someone to see you. She smiled at that, resting her head on my shoulder. And you needed someone to remind you that you were still alive. We stood there for a long time, the rain soft against the metal railing, the hum of the city fading beneath the sound of Mia's quiet breathing inside. The future wouldn't be perfect. There'd be trials, headlines, whispers, and all the complications that come with blending two worlds that were never meant to meet. But standing there, with her hand in mine, I realized perfection wasn't the goal, peace was. When I first shouted across that boardroom, I wasn't thinking about destiny or redemption. I was just trying to stop someone from making a mistake that couldn't be undone. But that one moment, that one act of instinct and courage, changed everything. It brought justice for Emma. It gave my daughter the safety she deserved. And somehow, it gave me a second chance at love I never thought I'd earn. Charlotte turned to me then, rain catching the light on her eyelashes. "Jake," she whispered, "thank you for saving my life." I wrapped my arms around her. "Thank you for saving ours." Because that's what it was, in the end, not a story about a CEO and a janitor, not even about revenge or redemption. It was about three broken people who found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something whole again. The rain kept falling, soft and steady, like forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I knew we were finally home.